Okay, again, welcome everyone. This is the 2023 State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program Technical Workshop. This is our second workshop that we have been hosting. We will be putting this recording on the web page. So if there's something that you didn't quite get, you can always go back to our website and look over this recording again. Next slide, Scott. Okay, a little bit about the program. Hopefully this is just review for most of you. But the SWEET program is a grant application process administered by us, the California Department of Food and Agriculture. It's funded through the general funds, and the purpose is to provide financial incentives for California ag operations to invest in irrigation systems that save water and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, just one second. Scott, can you do me a favor? Can you get in touch with Lynn McBride? She is unable to join, and she's one of our technical assistance providers that has not been able to get into these workshops. So sorry about that. Okay, moving on. About the program. Just a summary of the program updates. So this is changes from the last solicitation cycle. So we are going to return to a competitive process from the first come, first serve process that we used in our last solicitation in 2021. So if you don't know exactly what that was, basically what we did is we did a first come, first serve rolling basis application window. So there was no set start and end date. It was essentially whenever we ran out of funding. We allowed folks to continuously submit their applications, and their applications went into a queue for us to review and then dole out funding. We are going back to the competitive process, meaning that you are all going to be competing. All the applications that are submitted are going to be competitive against each other. There is a start window and then an end date. We'll discuss the dates in the next couple slides, but essentially you have until January 26th to submit your application. So what we really want to see in this solicitation, and we'll reiterate this a couple times throughout the presentation, but what we really want to see are really competitive, high quality applications instead of folks being really motivated to submit their applications as quickly as possible in order to get the first come, first serve funding. Okay, the second update that we did is that we have revised the scoring criteria to benefit additional considerations. And so we are using the subsurface drip irrigation, using manure effluent as one of those additional considerations. So you would get an extra point or so for incorporating subsurface drip irrigation using manure effluent. This is mostly for dairy farmers, and this is something that we did in the last solicitation cycle as well. And then thirdly, a really big change that we have to the solicitation cycle is that we're allowing folks to use a new project assessment tool for the quantification of greenhouse gas reductions, as well as the water irrigation quantification as well. We're going to go over those tools, the old two Excel-based tools versus a new tool later. But the point that I want to bring home is that you can use either or in this scenario, but you have to quantify your water and greenhouse gas benefits using one or the other. Another update that we have made in the solicitation cycle is that we are now funding parcels that have previously been funded. The SWEET program is over 10 years old at this point. So we've had folks who received funding many, many years ago and now are requesting to make additional upgrades. So those APNs will be eligible for funding, but the recipient needs to not remove the previously funded project within the 10 years of installation. CDFA is going to continue to prioritize socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers through a carve out of 25% of the funding. This is not new. However, the SDFRs that do not receive funding within that first 25% carve out are going to be competing for funds with the non-SDFR applicants. We've also added clarity on the type of technologies and components that CDFA funds as part of the Complete Irrigation System project, and we'll explain a little bit more of that later. And then the last thing is that we've strengthened the limits on the application submission and awards for the funding cycle. We've been trying to limit how an applicant can apply after they've received an award within a funding cycle. In the past, we've used tax identification numbers as a reference, but it has sort of been not entirely successful at limiting whether or not a person gets funded over and over again in the same cycle. So we're going to be using a little bit more information, such as like your mailing address or your contact name as a reference point to ensure that one individual is not receiving multiple awards within a funding cycle. And that's a question we tend to get quite a lot. Can someone get funded more than once in an application cycle? And the answer is no. Next slide, please. Alrighty, a little bit about the funding duration. We have $21 million available through general funds. The solicitation is now open and it will close January 26th of 2024. The project grant amounts should not exceed $200,000. You won't be able to exceed that amount in the application platform. We are using Amplifund. It will not allow you to go higher than $200,000. And the project duration will be 18 months. We are anticipating that solicitation, the term will start June 15th of 2024 and end in December 15th of 2025. We may anticipate having an extension, but I would not plan on that. So just ensure that when you are creating your applications and planning out your projects, that you intend on finishing it December 15th of 2025. That is also a question that we get quite often about extensions. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Scott. So the RGA came out December 5th of this year. Again, this is a competitive application process. Applications will be due January 26th, 2024. We are intending on announcing and awarding funding in February of next year. And again, the project start date will be June 15th, 2024. Next slide. Okay, our website, if you have not visited our webpage, is full of a lot of really, really great information and resources. If you're not familiar with the SWEEP program, this is a really, really great place to start. Scott and I get inundated with questions all the time from folks who are really interested in the program, which is fantastic. But most of the time, folks will email us and say, hey, we looked at we heard about the SWEEP program. Can you tell us about it? Scott and I don't have time to tell everyone about the SWEEP program, but we usually point folks to the website and kind of tell folks what resources are available. So if you are not very familiar with the website and the program, definitely start here. We do have the SWEEP request for grant applications. We call that the RGA. That document is going to have a lot of the nitty-gritty details about the program, the requirements, the eligibility, all of that really good information. We also have a budget template, and we're going to kind of discuss exactly what we're looking for with the budget. But that template is also on our webpage. You can download it, start filling it out, and kind of play around with it a little bit. We have the greenhouse gas calculator tool, as well as the irrigation water savings assessment tool. Both tools you're able to look at it and download it on our website as well. We're going to discuss these in much more detail, but we also have the SWEEP project assessment tool, which is the new tool that we've been working on with the Colorado State University. So when you're working on these quantification tools, you need to either use the greenhouse gas calculator and the irrigation water assessment savings tool, or you will use a SWEEP project assessment tool, which combines them both. It doesn't matter to us which one you use, whatever one works best for you, that's fine, as long as you use one or the other. We also have the FAQ doc. Scott and I update this every round. So the FAQ is a compilation of questions that we get asked within each round of SWEEP. If we have questions that we're not able to provide an answer to right away, we will jot those down. We'll meet with the sweep team. We may choose to include them in the FAQ or not, depending on whether or not it's been asked before, or if it's a variation on something we've been asked before. But if you have questions and you don't know those answers, definitely visit the FAQ. I guarantee you 90% of your questions have already been answered and already been asked in the FAQ. We also have the 2 workshops listed on our webpage. Again, this is the second workshop, so we will not be hosting any more workshops. However, we have a list of the technical assistance providers, and they will be hosting workshops of their own. So if you would like to attend one of those, or if you're a person who knows someone who's interested that wants to attend, that's a really great resource for learning more information about the program. And then also we will be posting the technical workshop recording, which is what we're doing right now. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we do have technical assistance providers for 2023. These folks are contracted with CDFA, and they provide assistance on several of our incentives programs here at the Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation. But for your information here, they are providing sweep assistance, and we have 12 different technical assistance providers throughout the state. The sections of the map that are colored in blue are the regions where the technical assistance providers are providing assistance. Some regions have multiple providers, and some of these providers also offer assistance outside of their county. Some folks will choose to provide statewide assistance. So if you're located in one of the counties that is not in the blue, don't freak out. I would visit the list of the technical assistance providers on our webpage. It's linked here on the slide, and just check it out. See where these TAPs are offering their assistance. Some of them may offer assistance in a county next door, or they may choose to provide statewide assistance as well. A lot of these folks are going to provide one-on-one application assistance, and they will also provide project implementation support, meaning that they will help you with your project after you've been awarded. And again, some of those providers are going to hold workshops. I believe I already put a web request to put the workshops online. So if you don't see it right away, just check back later today. We should have those workshops listed on our website. Next slide. Okay. UC A&R Climate Smart Ag Technical Assistance. These folks are the UC Community Education Specialists. They do a lot of the same work as the technical assistance providers. And a lot of times when I talk about the TAPs or the technical assistance providers, I'm talking about everyone, all the TAPs, the community education specialists. They are also contracted with us to do a lot of the same stuff. These folks are highly trained and they know what they're doing, and a lot of them are pretty familiar with our programs. So if you do have questions, it's best that you reach out to them. Something important to note is that Scott and I are not allowed to answer one-on-one specific project type questions. So if you have a question and you want to talk to someone and you want to get some advice on what you want to do with your application or your proposed project, definitely talk to the technical assistance providers. They're here to help you. So definitely, they're a really, really great resource, and we're really grateful to have them assist us to assist you. So there are 9 UC A&R community education specialists statewide. Again, they're going to provide one-on-one assistance with the application process. Some of them will hold workshops, which we will put online as well. They can be found here. We have a lot of folks that do provide assistance in other counties that are perhaps not shaded here, but it's best to reach out to them and just ask if they will provide assistance outside of their service area. I don't want to advertise that they will do that, but a lot of them are really kind and will assist. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's talk a little bit about eligibility for the SWEEP program. So California farmers, ranchers, and federal and California recognized Native American Indian tribes are eligible to apply. The irrigation project must be on a California agricultural operation, so that that ag operation needs to be within California. For the purposes of this program, an ag operation is defined as a row, vineyard, field, and tree crops, commercial nurseries, nursery stock production, and greenhouse operations producing food crops or flour as defined as Food and Ag Code section 77911. That's funny. Anytime I say greenhouse, it always has to be followed by gas. An ag operation or individual entity cannot receive a total cumulative sweep award amount of more than $600,000. This is something that Scott and I are tracking on our end. We have this cap in place to ensure that we are funding a lot of folks, and we're not, the same person within the same ag operation is not getting funded over and over and over again. So we do have that cap in place, and we do know who has received funding. If you are one of those folks that is getting close to that $600,000 cap, or you have reached it, Scott and I will know. And then applications cannot receive funding on the same APN for hardware previously funded by SWEEP. Note that you can now build on a previously funded APN for new water and energy saving strategies. However, we are looking to ensure that folks have not removed their previously funded components before that 10-year end. Additionally, an applicant must be at least 18 years or older to apply, and projects must save water and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. Okay, exclusions. Academic, university, research institutions, and state gov organizations are not eligible for funding. SWEEP funding cannot be combined with NRCS EQIP to fund the same components. We do get questions on this as well. Folks are able to apply to other federal funding programs such as EQIP. However, we will not allow folks to double dip. So if you are wanting to fund a solar array, we will fund some of those components, but we will not fund the same exact components as EQIP, or we can choose to fund the irrigation components, and then EQIP may choose to do the solar array, something like that. Basically, the point is we won't allow you to take funding from both programs for the same exact components. Next slide. Okay, priority funding. This is not new. 25% of the awarded funds are going to go to socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. Socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers are defined by the Farmer Equity Act of 2017. And those are folks who are identified as African Americans, Native Indians, Alaskan Natives, Hispanics, Asian Americans, and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. Next slide. Okay, a little bit about our project types. This is important because I want everyone to know that this is not an exhaustive list of the types of projects that SWEEP will fund. This is just a list of the main types of projects that we have seen in the past and that we generally will fund. So that will include irrigation scheduling, sensors and tools, soil weather sensors, flow sensors, automation, irrigation method improvements, so conversions to sprinkler, drip, SDI, or other forms of irrigation management. Improved irrigation infrastructure like tailwater recovery systems, water delivery gates, storage compensation reservoirs, any improved energy efficiency, so that can include pump replacement or a retrofit. Fuel conversion, so converting from diesel to electric, the installation of renewable energy, interconnect costs, variable frequency drives, the conversion of a high pressure to a low pressure system. So that could be a conversion from high pressure sprinklers to micro sprinklers, and then reduced pumping, and any other projects that combine water savings and greenhouse gas reductions. Scott and I get questions all day long about, hey, will you guys fund this type of technology or this type of project? I guess what I want folks to know in general is that we don't have a list of approved technologies or approved project types. This is just a general list of the project types that we do fund. As long as you can prove to us through the quantification tools that you will have a reduction in irrigation water use and a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Your project likely will be funded. I do want folks to note that we do mostly fund tried and true methods, so we aren't really looking to fund research projects or anything like that. Anything that is investigatory, we're not really going to fund that. So we are mostly looking for tried and true methods for water use reductions and greenhouse gas reductions as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, program requirements. We've alluded to this a little bit, but you can only submit one application per person using the operations legal business name and unique tax identification number. If you're submitting as a sole proprietor, use the last 4 digits of your social security number. Again, you can request funding for a previously funded APN as long as that previous project is not being replaced. And your projects need to include a flow meter or demonstrate actual water will be measured with an existing flow meter or by the water supplier. The reason for this is that we need a baseline water measurement. That way we can have a before and after quantification of your water use. Otherwise, the irrigation water calculator tool is not going to work. You're not going to have a realistic or even any kind of estimation of your water use efficiency or your irrigation water reductions. So it's really important that you have some sort of demonstration of actual water use before the project starts. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Scott. Scott is going to discuss the details of our 2 older tools and compare that to the new tool that we've been working on. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Steph. And sorry I didn't get to everyone's Q&As that are in the chat. I've been trying to keep up with y'all. Rest assured that some of those questions we're going to go into, particularly about the budget and allowable expenses, etc. So I think Steph will probably take over Q&A, and then we'll have an open session at the end where you guys can ask questions either through the chat or do it live. When we get there, so please bear with us. Okay, so a little bit about the program requirements. Applicants are required to estimate water and GHG savings that will result from this proposed project once the project's been implemented, and they're required to do it via two different options. So option 1 is to use the Microsoft Excel-based workbooks. Folks that are familiar with Sweep are probably familiar with the fact that we've had these Excel-based workbooks that we've used to estimate water and GHG savings in the past, and they have provided an output. I will show you how it all works in a minute, but new to this round is option 2. Option 2 is the Sweep Project Assessment Tool. It's a tool that's a web-based tool we developed in tandem with Colorado State University, and it's used to estimate both water savings and GHG savings, emission reductions. In addition to calculating the GHG benefits that are associated with irrigation, with the irrigation pumps, it also includes changes to the irrigation style or type. So if you're converting from flood irrigation to drip irrigation, there's some N2O emission impacts associated with that, which N2O is a GHG, a greenhouse gas. So that'll be incorporated with the new tool. Both of these tools do require that you have energy records and pump tests. If your ag operation currently is using electricity to pump or fuel to pump and has a pump present. However, option number 2 does allow for the potential for individuals who do not have currently a pumping system to install a pumping system, meaning that if you're going over to your field and you're just lifting a floodgate and letting it flood to the tail end of your field, that doesn't require any electricity. There's no pump involved there. But if you're interested in implementing a Sweep project, you can receive funding now via the new tool. Now that's a change from the past. In the past, we've always required that your projects have baseline pumping systems. I really want to stress this one point though. If you have pumps and their baseline, you do need to gather that information. You do need to go get overall pumping efficiency test done for these pumps and incorporate it into the application and substantiate the data you're going to be putting in here. So it's a requirement with the exception of when you don't have it at all. Okay. So program restrictions, sweep funds cannot be used to expand existing agricultural operations. So, you can't buy your neighbor's parcel and expand upon it via the sweep program. Or convert land that wasn't active into farmland. Now, I know that's not happening that much these days, but you also cannot install new groundwater wells or increase the depth of a pre-existing groundwater well using these funds. Test experimental technology, perform research. I know that Steph had gone over this. We don't allow for the paying of engineering costs associated with the project design, development, and planning. This is all preliminary costs that you would be incurring while you're setting up a proposal. So those costs are not covered. Or the purchase of tools or equipment with a useful life of less than 2 years. So we're not going to fund the application or the filling of gypsum or a fertigation machine that has fertilizer in it. We would pay for the hardware associated with those two examples, but not the materials that have a shorter live life than 2 years. That's not an exhaustive list. Please visit the RGA, the request for grant applications. That has a list of the unallowable costs, further elaborated on, but I'm trying to get those points across. So if you're an interested person and interested in applying for the program, you're going to submit an application. There's a series of attachments that are necessary in order to submit an application. First of all, you need to have a project design. It's a spatial tool. What are you planning on doing? It'll show what that is. You also need to have a completed budget worksheet. Note the word completed. We've unfortunately had people submit unsaved versions of them, and they'll just be blank documents. And so if there's something in there that's not substantive for us to review it. If you're installing solar, solar quote is required. You need to have a completed irrigation water savings assessment tool, a completed ARB greenhouse gas calculator tool. If you're going with option 1, which I elaborated earlier, if you're going with option 2, you're going to have that sweep tool. That's a sweep assessment tool. I'll go over these tools. It should make a little bit more sense when we get to it. 12 consecutive months of baseline GHG emission documentation from any pumps that are impacted by the project. So we need fuel records. We need PG&E or utility bills for the past 12 consecutive months to substantiate the amount of energy that you've been using. And of course, we need pump efficiency tests with pump specific documentation. So those two, the energy records and the pump tests, they're required for every single application, except the one that I outlined earlier, in which you don't have a pumping system present. You're just lifting that floodgate and letting the water flow across. So if that's not the case, you won't be required to do that. The application is built in a way that you'll have to put this information in unless you indicate that you don't have those things. Project design must include the following as is applicable. So we want to know the labeled assessor parcel numbers, put the APN number on that design, detailed schematic of the locations of the proposed improvement of the infrastructure, including technologies, reservoirs, pumps and sensors, etc. Pertinent agronomic information such as the distribution uniformity. And then really what's key here is that it's a holistic overview of using aerial imagery software. So you can use Google Maps or various other tools and take a screenshot of that and then edit it and put in some information where you would put where I'm going to be putting in my pump station, where my soil moisture sensors may or may not be. And I'll show you just a simple example. So this is a simple example. We've seen much more comprehensive ones. We've seen individuals that submit CAD drawings that are detailed schematics, so the underlying main lines, etc., that are part of it. Here's just a simple example. Basically, there's an APN. It looks like that green line is 160 acres, but the blue line is where my field's going to be, and that's only 80 acres planted with corn. I'm proposing putting in a pipeline that replaces a ditch in order to decrease the seepage and install 2 soil moisture stations. And at my pumping station, it looks like I want to install some solar, evapotranspiration sensor, new electric pump, a new variable frequency drive, and a flow meter all in that area. I've definitely seen schematics that are more detailed than this, and I'd prefer that this is just a baseline example. Okay, the budget worksheet. Budget worksheet is itemized, and it itemizes all the allowable costs related to the project into various categories. So there's supplies and equipment, labor, and other. Projects, they must be consistent with the project design. So meaning that if your project design says I'm putting in a new pump, we should see a pump inside the budget. That would make sense. To the extent feasible, or to the extent reasonable, you can use the NRCS equip payment schedule as a guide to estimate the cost of some of these items. You don't necessarily have to go and get quotes from vendors preliminarily, because the USDA has a guide about some of these component costs. See the request. So of course you can look at the request for grant applications to see the list of allowable and unallowable costs. So if we see in a budget that you have a cost that's drilling a new well, like I said earlier, that's an unallowable cost. That'll be a flag for us, and you'll probably disqualify your grant from moving forward. Okay, so here's a preview of what it is. On the SWEEP webpage, you will find a link for this, and I'll show you the webpage in a moment. But this is an Excel-based budget, and it has a combination of columns and rows. What's important here is that we have that row that is supplies and equipment, other, labor, and then the matching funds category. Matching funds is dollars that you're bringing to the table as part of this grant. And then the blue section is where the requests are coming from. But the columns is what I want to focus on here, which is there's these various categories that you can fall into. So you can have irrigation system improvements. This might be installing drip line, per se, or in my past example, putting in a pipeline. Irrigation water management, that consists of the soil moisture sensors, the flow meters, the ET sensors, things of that nature, that would go into irrigation water management technology. And there's a little description right below it. Someone asked in the chat, so I want to make sure that this is clear, that there's a little, sometimes these soil moisture sensors have a little solar panel that's used to charge it in the field. That doesn't need to go into the solar renewable energy because it holistically falls into the category of irrigation water management. So you're really going to want to think about what it best represents, this item that I'm putting in what category. Then there's also pump and energy improvements. I'm going to be putting in a variable frequency drive, perhaps a new pump. This is where I put those items in here. Solar and renewable energy projects. This is where I'm going to be putting in that I'm putting in a 10 kilowatt solar system, put in the number of panels, inverters, racking perhaps. And then other management practices. That's where something that might not fall into the categories that are already listed here. So please make sure that you add the items in the correct column and row. Supplies and equipment is really sort of a catch-all, other than labor. Labor is going to be in the other category. Now, other exists for things that don't fit into those other categories. So that's where both the column and the row of other are for. Okay, SWEEP irrigation water savings assessment tool. This is a screenshot of what the tool looks like. I think I'll probably be better served to just open it up and show you. I think I have it in the tab. Okay, first and foremost, there's an instructions tab. It's an instructions tab for a reason. Please read the instructions. It'll tell you about what's defined as irrigation water management levels, where you find some of your soil data, where I'm going to find my baseline township and range as a source of reference. And that'll make sense in a moment. So after I've read this, I'm going to go into my before tab. Before section is what I'm currently doing. So I look up my soil data and I find out that I have silt. I'm currently growing apples, and my baseline township and range. This is sort of a it's a quadrant system. It's kind of like a lat long, where my my GPS coordinates are essentially. So I'll find that my baseline township and range is here based off of my README tab, which had a directions to get to that information. And this baseline township and range puts you in an ET zone. That's how we measure the evapotranspiration. Okay. Now, in this proposal, it looks like I have surface irrigation with low distribution uniformity. Okay, sounds good. And I can change these, I can click through it. In my after scenario, as it loads, looks like I'm in the same soil type. Please keep in mind that these work independently of each other, these tabs. So if I have sand in one and silt in the other, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't think you're changing your whole soil type in your field. Make sure that it's reflective in both. That's true for the baseline township and range and the crop, and actually they work independently of each other, both these tabs. So it looks like I was interested in converting to almonds. My apples are going away, and I'm going to be putting in an almond orchard. And then I want to do surface irrigation with improved distribution uniformity, which means that I'm having split runs, and a higher DU across the plane. Now, irrigation water management, this is the increase I'm going to be doing for my irrigation water management system. So in the event that I have a field, and let's say I already have a flow meter, and I'm interested in putting in a soil moisture meter. Well, that is defined as an irrigation water management level 2 system. So the system has 3 components: the flow meter, the ET sensor, and the soil moisture sensor. I already had the flow meter, and I'm going to be putting in a soil moisture sensor. That's level 2. However, it is only an increase of one level, because I already have that flow meter. So that's an important piece of information to include here into the calculation. And occasionally it'll pop up a little error. If I switch it might do it. Yeah, so it's just click through it. It's fine. It'll just figure itself out. The tool doesn't really like Mac computers either. So in the event that you're in that realm, try using a PC. And then now it's going to give me an output. It looks like I'm going to be saving 17.95% water. And then these are my before and after scenarios and annual water, estimated water savings in acre inches per acre. That's just what the tool is proposing. Okay, so I've completed that. So now I want to go to the GHG calculator tool and the supporting documentation. So applicants need to include a copy of the GHG calculator tool, an explanation of inputs used into that calculator, and then GHG supporting documents, so that pump test, pump specifications, and energy records. I think I've talked about that. You need actual baseline GHG emission data. So it's not that I think I used 10,000 kilowatts. It's that I did, and it's here on the bill. So, and it's true for the overall pumping efficiency as well. Must cover 12 months of prior irrigation season. Pump efficiency tests required. Pump tests are not. Let's see. Okay, so pump efficiency tests and information from the pump motor specifications are required and an attachment. So it's a 75 horsepower pump operating at 80% overall pumping efficiency with a well depth of 100 feet. If I'm using the other tool, and this is just a reminder, if I'm using option 2, I'm not required to have pump information if I'm just doing that floodgate scenario. If I have a pump, I am required to have it. I'm sorry if I keep reiterating this. I want to try and make it as clear as possible. As there's not a lot of scenarios in which you don't need to have a pump efficiency test or energy records. They're probably quite rare. Okay, overall pumping efficiency. This is just an example of a overall pumping efficiency test. Right here, it's showing that there's a 57% of this 100 horsepower pump, and then it looks like it's going to be retrofit to be a 67% efficiency. And there's other information in here, including flow rates, the motor efficiency, pumping level, discharge pressure, etc. These things can be useful when I'm putting in my calculator. Okay, so this is the ARB, or the greenhouse gas quantification tool. And let me open that up, this thing. Okay, README tab. README tabs are important. Please read me. Please fill out yellow boxes. So I filled this out. I said that I'm 100 acres and I'm requesting $50,000. Everything else should be completed in this as well, but I put that in there just because the calculator won't work if I don't have the acreage in here or the money, that's the amount that's requested. So it has 5 different input tabs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down below. You can have up to 5 pumps. In the event that you have 6 or 12 pumps or however many more, you'll just need to do more calculators and attach them as additional attachments. But in this case, I think I only have one. I think, yeah, I only filled it up for 1 input just to show you how it works. So my field or ranch name, I just call these ranches tests to make sure that I don't accidentally apply it myself. I have in my pump record or in my energy records that I received from the utility, they showed me that I have used 10,000 kilowatt hours. My fuel type is electricity. And then it has a baseline emission factor that's associated with that. Now my motor rated horsepower, I think the last one was 100, but the point being here is that I'm saying I had a 50 horsepower pump. So there's a column here and a column here. This is the pre-project column and this is the post-project column. So pre-project, I have a 50 horsepower pump. It's 80% efficiency based on that OPE, the overall pumping efficiency, the test that I had done. It's the pumping depth is 100 feet. The water level is 100 feet down. Discharge pressure is in feet and not PSI, you'll see. If you get it in PSI, you'll need to convert it to feet. And there's a pressure conversion tab down here. And then friction loss. Friction loss is a known, default value being 10 for well pumps, 5 being for a booster pump. And in this case, it looks like I'm not interested in actually upgrading this pump, but I still needed to substantiate that I had it. So I have this pump, this is my efficiency. I believe the actual water savings assessment tool said I had 17% efficiency here. And I can move forward with that. If I'm converting the fuel type, I can change it to from diesel here to this little drop down menu. I can change it to diesel and then change this to electricity as part of my fuel conversion. If I'm putting in renewable energy, so if I'm putting in a solar system, one thing that's important is that I put in the kilowatts capacity, the scale that this thing is rated in kilowatts, and not the annual kilowatt hour generation. It's a common mistake we see where individuals will put a number like 4,000 in here. And unless you're installing a 4 megawatt solar system, which is really unlikely, you're probably installing maybe a 5 kilowatt solar system that generates 4,000 kilowatt hours. So just keep that in mind. It should be a low number. If it's above 100, I'd really scratch your head and ask yourself, are you putting in a pretty small or pretty large system? Okay, then there is the summary tab. This will put the output information about what my GHG benefits are per acre. This information is necessary for the application. There's a bunch of other calculation tabs. So this will talk about what my conversions are and definitions and default tabs. These are for your reading if you're interested in learning more about how the tool works. Okay. All right, now this one's exciting. This is the new tool, a Suite Project Assessment Tool. CDFA has a new web-based tool, which is designed to be a special tool that combines both of these calculators together. And it also includes the use of N2O emissions. The tool automatically identifies the soil type and the ET zone and the acreage of the project. We have seen a few times that the soil type is not being grabbed right away. I have had luck by just doing it again and finding that soil type, but in the event that there's some sort of soil texture issue, you might need to use the old tool, or you might have to just try it again. We're working on getting that corrected. So the tool includes N2O savings associated with the changes in irrigation strategy. At the end, an applicant can download the project map and use it as a baseline as a project design if they want to. It's not a holistic project design. It's not comprehensive enough to be a project design, but it gives you the base information. And you can save the project and reload it later. So it has the ability to have essentially a save file. It's not a tool that you have a login for. And so because you don't have a login and an account, it doesn't automatically save it, but you can download it and then re-upload it and edit it later. Okay, I want to show you how that tool works. Let's hope that I have the. Okay. Okay, here's the sweep web page. I'm actually going to go over the sweep web page in a moment on another slide. So I'm just going to go to the sweep project assessment tool, which is right there. And I'm going to do one live for you all. So as I loaded it in a new tab, it asks me, enter the name of the agricultural operation to begin. It says test. First of all, let me explain this. This is another review tab. Please read this, review it. You're going to need to know your project location, the current crops, and the future crop you're going to be doing. You're going to want to know your predominant soil type, but the tool will automatically look it up for you. Of course, you're going to want to know what the current irrigation method is. So if you're flood irrigating, that should be known. You want to know the information of your irrigation pumps, the overall pumping efficiency, the well depth, motor horsepower, etc., and then the annual energy use. So you still need the same information. And you're going to undergo several steps. You're going to identify the field, identify the crops that you have, identify the future crops you're going to be putting in, future irrigation system, and then complete and save and download. It'll make sense. So, okay, if I already have my save file, I can load a project. I have a couple I can load, but I won't do that. I'm going to start a new one. So I'm going to click start. My project is named test. And I live in, let's find a spot to live. Okay. 5 corners. Let's go we're near 5 corners. Let's just say this is my field. So I can choose a color for my field. I want to choose green, and I have the option to set it up via putting points around, do a circle, do a square, and this is the hand to drag around. But so I find that I like using this tool the most. And let's just say that this is my field. I'm going to annex my house out of it. And I'm going to just trace around it, trying to be accurate as possible. I can zoom in to get a higher level of detail. And we're going to call this a field of almonds. Yeah, so see, I didn't do a very good job getting this corner. That's okay. Oh, zoom in and do a better job than I'm doing. Okay. I think I can actually edit it if I need to. But for the sake of the demonstration, that's my field of almonds. Now, I also own this field. Let's say I own this field, and it looks like I've been doing rotational crops here. So I'm going to draw another field, and I can use the square tool. It looks kind of like a square field. Let's see if it works. Yeah, see, I don't like that. It's got a kind of a bad curve to it. It's not quite square. So let's not do that. No, cancel that field. And let's do that field. Oh, come on. Now, sorry. You'll play around with it a bit. You'll figure it out. Cancel that field. I want to get to here so I can actually draw in here. And I am going to say that, my field probably ends here. I have a spot over here that's like for washing my equipment, let's say. And for now, I'm just going to farm this land. And that I could have chosen a different color. Maybe I should have. But let's say I grow rotational crops, and I want to convert this to walnuts. So right now I'm growing walnuts, but I'm getting out. Right now I'm growing rotational crops. I want to get out of that business. I want to get into the tree business, and it's about 8 acres, 8.5. Okay. So now that I have these 2 fields drawn, I want to know information about what these fields are. I know I named these specifically so it's easy for me to remember what field I'm talking about. So field of almonds, I'm going to go to click on the management tab, and I'm going to go pre-project cropping system. So I have almonds, and I have it for all 3 years. So this tab is going to ask you for the different crops you have year over year. And also if you're doing multiple crops per year, so like a diversified rotational field, which I'll show you in a minute. But for this case, I'm just growing almonds. I'm not growing anything in between the rows or anything like that. So it's pretty straightforward almonds. Now I don't need to put in my crop 2 and 3 because I've already defined that it's almonds. The tool will look it up. If I did, it wouldn't make a difference. But I'll save that. Post-project crops. You know what? I like my almonds. I'm going to keep doing that. This field's doing well for me. Pre-project irrigation system. So right now the problem is that I have surface irrigation. I'm a happy farmer. I've always been really efficient with my surface irrigation. But you know, this sweep project is intriguing me and I'm interested in trying to get let's say drip. But right now I have a really nice surface irrigation system, good distribution uniformity. I'm happy with it. Post-project irrigation system, I'm going to be putting in surface drip. Save that. Irrigation water management. So, okay, as I alluded earlier, let's say that I already have a flow meter, because I've always just been mindful of how much water I've been applying. Okay, that's what I already have. But I already have a flow meter, but I want to install soil moisture sensor. So post-project, I'm going to have a flow meter and a soil moisture sensor. I'll save that. Now let's do the rotational crops. Pre-project cropping system. I forgot what I did the other day. I'm growing cabbage in the spring, broccoli in the summer, and green beans in the fall. And I'm sure that don't hate me in the accuracy of these seasonal crops. Cabbage, broccoli, and green beans. And I'm growing all three of them. I've been growing all three for the same for 3 years in rotation. And I think it's been going well for me. But my post-project cropping system, I really, like I said before, I want to go with walnuts. I'm excited about walnuts. So I'm converting my crop system here. So pre-project irrigation system, I have surface irrigation. Again, I've been doing a good job. I've been happy with my distribution uniformity. And then this time, instead of putting surface drip, I'm going to put micro sprinklers. I could put solid set sprinklers too if I wanted to, whatever I'm thinking, but microjet has a little bit more of a broadcast, so it makes me happy for the walnuts. And I already have that flow meter because the way I'll show you in a minute that I'm going to have a pumping system that's shared for these two fields. I already have a flow meter, and I am going to be putting in a flow meter, and I really like the soil moisture meter in my almond field. I think I'll put one of my walnuts too as I try and really hone my skills. Okay. Now where's my pump? Okay, so I'm going to say my pump is right by my, I have a little barnyard right here. That's where I have my pump, and I am going to call this barn pump. It's just whatever I name it. But what fields is it servicing? Well, I'm servicing the field of almonds and then the rotational crops that are converting into walnuts. Motor rated horsepower for this pump is a 50 horsepower pump. I did my pump efficiency test, and I was really happy to see that I have 80% efficiency. Pumping depth, the groundwater is about 100 feet down in this area. Discharge pressure, it's in feet. So I'm going to convert my discharge pressure that I read at the wellhead, which is PSI most of the time, 2 feet. I'm going to say it's 60. Friction loss, it's a known because it's a well pump. It's a 10. I have electricity that I have right by my house. Is the pump proposed for improvement? Yeah, I'm going to put a variable frequency drive here as I try and do block irrigation. So I think it'll be helpful for me to change this. So the thing is, the pump is not changing, but the whole system is changing because I'm adding a VFD. So 60, friction loss was 10. Am I installing a VFD? Yeah, I'm installing a booster pump. Sorry, I'm installing a well pump variable frequency drive, and it's still electricity. Now I could have said I had diesel and then converted to electric. That's another option. It's to have some flexibility here. Okay, now let's just say that's what I have. But I also, I want to be able to I'm worried that my new pumping system is not going to have enough pressure to irrigate the right PSI because I've been doing flood irrigation. And actually, anyway, my point is I'm going to add another pump. I'm going to add a booster pump for the sake of um, example here. It doesn't quite make sense, but I'm just going to show you that. So add proposed irrigation pump. I'm going to put a booster pump right outside that one. We call this my booster. And I am going to be servicing both fields in this case. My motor rated horsepower 20. I received the pump specs from the vendor. It seems like it's going to be pretty good, 80. Depth, it's pretty low. So discharge pressure is, let's just say it's 80 now. Friction loss is 5. It's a known. Am I installing a VFD on this one? No, I don't need a VFD. I already have a VFD upstream. Then this is going to be tapped into the electricity and anticipated electrical use. This is based off of your experience and how much you think this thing is going to be using. So I'm going to say it's been using 10,000. In the past, I've used a lot of energy from flood irrigating, but I'm going to hope to see a reduction in that. So I'm going to save that. As I go down on this list, I'll see that I can now use my electricity use. Now, this is where I received my PG&E records from the utility. They said last year I used 50,000 kilowatt hours. Sorry, I know I'm using different numbers and different tools, but I hope this makes sense. Does any non-irrigation hardware draw electricity from this utility pump? Yeah, I have this barn right here. So yeah, something is here. And I'm just going to answer yes to that. And then we are going to view the reports. Okay, so first of all, before I do that, I have these tabs to use soil imagery data, APN data, and ET zone data that'll show on the screen. I can take a screenshot of this right here if I want to take a snip and make that as a baseline for a project design. I could also download this map, which will download a version of it. But let's go to view reports. Let's hope this works. So I think I was requesting $50,000. Again, I don't remember. And now it's estimating my total GHG emission reductions post project, my assessment tool, field data location. So this is my latitude, longitude, how many acres these two different cropping fields are, the emission reductions from the pumping system, the nitrous oxide impacts associated with this. You'll see that I'm having a booster pump right here that doesn't have pre-project GHG, but has post-project GHG. So that makes sense, right? You're using more energy post-project. And then annual irrigation. Oh, so there's the nitrous oxide, GHG emission reductions, and then the annual irrigation water savings on the irrigation system. So these are all collapsible carrots. What's important here is that I download these reports, download the report, download the map, download the project file. You're going to attach all of those to the application itself. The project file is basically your save file. So it'll download as like a TXT file, and then you can re-upload it and deal with it later. So yeah, that was a sneak peek of the thing. The tool also has the capacity to allow you to have fields that don't have pressurization preliminarily, and then you're going to be post-project installing a booster pump. So let's just say I'm lifting that floodgate and I'm going to be putting a booster pump to pressurize it to put in a center pivot. That flexibility is added to the new tool. Okay. All right. Okay. But the review and the evaluation process. So there are multiple levels of review. There's the administrative review, which is done internally. This is done by Anna, Sylvia, staff, and myself as we go through these projects and we look at them. We make sure that you have the correct attachments, that there's no corrupt files, that you're actually providing a pump test and not a pump specifications from a vendor, that there's actual energy records, and it's not just a sticky note saying I pinky that this is how much energy I used. We need real information here. So and then we send that information, assuming it passes the administrative disqualification process. We send those to the technical reviewers. Now, this is conducted by third-party technical experts. that work in the field of irrigation, oftentimes PhDs that are inside of the UC and the CSU systems. So subject matter experts. From that, we will select the applications for funding based off on the following criteria: the score provided by the technical reviewer, which includes the project expected benefits, and also if your project has been previously awarded an applicant. So if you're a first-time applicant, you'll receive some level, it'll be like a tiebreaker per se. Administrative review, so CFA administrative staff and technical staff will review these applications and ensure that they're complete and that all the minimum requirements are there. Attachments are readable, APNs are identified, and they're not previously funded for the same components. So we talked about that previously funded awards APN. So if we see that we've funded a project in the past that resulted in you installing drip irrigation and you're asking to install drip irrigation again, and we see it in the project, we would disqualify that and not move it forward because we'd be building up upon a previously funded project for the same components that were supported prior. Projects are going to be reviewed to ensure that there's only one application has been submitted per applicant. So we're going to be reviewing the tax identification number, the address of the field site location, and the name of the applicant. And when we see overlaps here, we'll be disqualifying people. First of all, you can only apply one time. The tool itself, the application itself will only allow you to apply one time. And we're really asking folks to try and just see to it that there's one award, per operation. So there's also the funding, previously funded applicants that cannot receive an award of over $600,000. We have a few folks that are close to that cap, but it's been a longstanding cap of trying to essentially distribute the funds. Disqualified applicants are going to be notified for reasons of their disqualification, and they may correct and prepare a corrected application for future rounds of funding. So this is just, hey, your pump test wasn't a pump test. It was a pump specifications provided by a vendor. Hey, you didn't attach energy records, so on and so forth. We would provide that feedback to you. And so therefore you can prepare and correct and then prepare for the next solicitation. Okay, technical scoring rubric. I would encourage you all to go to the RGA and look at this a little bit deeper, but the technical scoring rubric has a series of categories. Each project is going to be scored out of 50 points. There's the quantity of estimated water savings, the quantity of estimated GHG reductions, also the project expected benefits. So the quantity of energy and water the GHG and energy savings are both worth 15. The project expected benefits is worth 10 points. And you'll see, I think there's 7 or 8 categories in there. You only have to have up to 5 of those categories to get the maximum amount for that category. Let me say that again. You only need to have 5 of those subcategories in order to get maximum 10 points out of that total category, meaning that you don't have to adopt all of these practices of groundwater sustainability, energy efficiency, renewable energy, protects water quality, water recycling, air quality, climate and drought adaptation, and irrigation training. You'll see the further details in the RGA about what's defining those characteristics. The budget scored by the technical reviewer based on its completeness, making sure that it's representative of what the application is showing, what the applicant is proposing to do, and that these items are listed and actually spelled out in the budget. Keep in mind that renewable energy components that are greater than 40% of the grant request do have a negative 5 points on there, and then irrigation scheduling tools that are greater than 40% of the total grant requests are negative 5 points also. This is just in order to incentivize broadening of some of these projects to make sure that we're receiving holistic projects that are going to be tackling the objectives of the SWEEP program. This is not to say that you can't apply for a project that's 70% solar. It's just be aware that there is a a penalty there. So okay, how do I apply? The online application platform. So applicants can access the application from the SWEEP webpage, log in and access the application and submit it. There's an ample fund submission portal. What you need to have on hand is that project design, that budget, water calculator, SWEEP, or the SWEEP assessment tool, and those pump tests and energy records, if it's applicable. I want to show you the website real quick, and then I'll show you a little bit of the preview of applying for the grant. So here's the website. You'll come here and you'll find, if you can't find it, just Google CDFA SWEEP and it'll pop up. It'll probably be the first thing. State Water Efficiency Enhancement Program, so you can read this. We have here that RGA, the request for grant applications, the frequently asked questions. This is what we're going to be updating periodically. The informational workshop, we're going to be posting. So this is where you signed up for it. So you obviously found it. So we're going to be posting the recording of this website, of this presentation here. And then there's this question and answer timeline. So we're heading close to our receive questions by and respond by the 20th. We have 2 cycles of that, and then some of the other information that's useful. Here's where we're going to find the budget worksheet. Please use the 2023, the new one. If you have an old version floating around, don't use that. Use the new one. Use the SWEEP Irrigation Water Savings Assessment tool here, SWEEP Greenhouse Gas Calculator tool. Use the 2 Excel documents. And then the SWEEP Project Assessment tool. I'll tell you to access that. This is where you find those UC community education specialists that Steph had talked about earlier. This is where you can find their contact information, their service area, etc. And then this is where you find the technical assistance providers, contact information and service area. I believe that there's also on here that you can find where their workshops are going to be, or when their workshops will be. Okay, now I want to show you how to apply. Okay, hopefully this works. Log in. This is just a mock application that I've created. It's going to be a bunch of gibberish. You'll see. But this is a README section first. README sections are around for a reason. Please read them. So go ahead and it'll show you like what the nature of this grant is, what our submission timelines are, some brief descriptions, etc. I'm going to click apply. Now I have a project that is unsubmitted that I've already filled out before, just to be prepared for this meeting. And then I have, first of all, it should launch me to the project information. This is where I put in really basic information about myself, how much money I'm requesting, postal code, area, and contact information. The application form itself is where the real sort of meat and potatoes are for this grant. Okay, I click on this, it opens up, yeah. So the 2023 SWEEP application. There's only one form, it's rather large. Please save it throughout. There's always a chance that it can, cancel on you or crash on you. So just keep saving it. If you have applicant information, this is where you get I would enter that I'm putting a social security number, my mailing address, information like that. These are smart forms. So if I'm going to be using a tax ID or if I'm a sole proprietor or something along those lines, I would put something different. I'll show you what I mean by that. So in here it says, do I belong to a socially disadvantaged farmer? If I say no, that question goes away. If I say yes, it'll ask me to follow-up question. What group do I fall into? But I'm not. I'm going to say no. Proposed project location. I don't think I was in this, but I can select multiple counties if necessary. So I can just collect one, or I can click Control and or Shift, and I can collect multiple. I can select multiple counties. Let's see. Let's go over the categories here. So there's application information, or applicant information. That's just my contact information, etc. Proposed location, where I'm planning on having this project. Have I been previously funded? Sorry, someone just rang my doorbell. Hopefully you didn't hear that, but that's okay. Previously funded, is it a current, what's my current irrigation system? I can't imagine you didn't hear my doorbell ring. It was fairly loud. All right. Have I been previously funded by the program? Current irrigation system practices. So this is what I currently have. I think I had flood irrigation was what I was saying. And I would describe what I'm currently doing. I've put in different things than the narrative I had before, but this all is fairly intuitive if you just read through it. Then I want to get to my project proposal. What am I planning on doing? So after I've already put in all that base information about what I am doing, what am I planning on doing? This is when I talk about I'm doing a crop conversion. I've answered these questions. Then I go to the water savings and GHG reduction strategy components. Now there's a series of categories that we have outlined, which are for water conservation strategies. And that can include the irrigation scheduling tools and different items, so, automated irrigation systems, irrigation infrastructure, etc. And then we'll go into the energy use reduction or installation of renewable energy. And that's when I talk about my pumping system. Let's just say I was converting from diesel to electric. Well, that's an energy use. That's a energy use part that's going into this. What I'm doing to my pump, etc. And then we have that other management practices category. This is for the pond liners and the things that may not be apparent where they land in some of these other things, but are allowable expenses. And then I have the opportunity to estimate my water and GHG savings, and I have these options where I would go option 1 or 2. I've shown you both option 2 and option 1 before about the Excel base or the web tool. And if I select what option I'm doing, the tool itself will lead you down a path to upload the correct information. So I'm going to put all that information in here. And then attach my files. One thing I'll tell you is that I can attach multiple files to a single attached file spot. So if I have 3 pump tests, I can attach all 3 of them to a single one. I'll attach my design, my on-farm GHG statement documentation. This is where I'm going to say that I have, here's my energy records, additional supporting documentation. If I have any additional things, I have maybe a letter from somebody that a letter of support, which is not a requirement, by the way. You don't have to have a letter of support, but if you wish to provide that, you're welcome to. Budget, additional attachments, and then this is really the catch-all. If I have, actually, this is probably a better spot to put the letter of support here. Sorry, I misspoke. And then project duration and acknowledgement. This is just that I acknowledge that I've only applied one time, that I received technical assistance from a person that's close by, or that I agree to implement my project during the time. And then actually, if I have some of these that are required and I don't select them, let's find one that's so there's nothing in there. The field's required, right? So if I say mark as complete, okay, so if I mark it as complete, it'll tell me it's not complete. There's something wrong here. And then this thing will be in red and it'll say, how many pumps am I using? Well, I'm using 1. So then I can mark this as complete. Now I'm going to need to mark each one of these tabs as complete, and they'll form these little checkboxes before I get to the submit tab, and then I can submit it here. Now I can't submit it because I haven't marked project information complete. That's why it has these checkboxes. Just know that once you've completed it, you still need to submit it. Okay. Okay, I hope that was helpful. We have that frequently asked questions process, which I did allude to a little bit, but and Steph's talked about, there's a FAQ document on the website. This is a great resource for looking into questions that have been asked over the years. This is our 12th round of sweep, by the way. So we have a lot of FAQs that we've gathered. And this is a great resource to look at in order to get some of those questions answered before maybe you reach out to a technical assistance provider or submit a FAQ to CDFA. We plan on updating this list. We're going to close the new FAQ process on the 14th of December for phase 1, and then we're planning on posting these December 22nd. And then we'll open another phase January 12th until January 17th. And then once we're done with updating the FAQs as we receive new project questions, we will post those to the webpage. It will be your responsibility to go and look at the FAQ and find the updated responses for some of these items so you can move forward. Okay, I want to just talk a little bit about what happens if in the event that you're selected for an award. So if you're selected for an award, there's this grant execution process, but it's conditional upon several things. So you need to agree to be doing what's called a pre-project consultation. This is when CDFA staff will talk to you about what the project proposal is and make sure that we're on the same page. And then we may or may not adjust various things in your grant to just make sure it's looking correct. There's also a process in between this about the invoicing, reimbursement, and the gap manual. But once your project has gone through and been selected for an award, been fully implemented, we do have a post-project verification process, which is when someone may come to your field site and inspect the project to make sure it's installed in accordance to what was proposed. Additionally, we have post-project reporting conducted by CDFA or potentially a third party, where we'll ask for water and energy records post-project outcome, and you'll need to provide that to us. And then you are expected to maintain the system for a minimum of 10 years post-project outcome, post-project implementation. Some of the awardee resources we have. Once the project has been executed and it has a grant agreement, we're going to provide additional resources. So we're not just going to, let you go. Don't worry. We have what's called a gap manual, the Grant Awards Procedural Manual. This document, which we're working on updating, is going to give you a lot of the key components about how the reimbursement process works, how advance payments work, etc. And this is really a useful resource for you to have in the event you're selected. There is an advance payment request form, which CDFA does a lot. So this is a reimbursement style grant, meaning that we will reimburse expenses already incurred. Now, we realize that sometimes that doesn't work for certain folks, so we do have an advance payment request form. You'll need to provide substantial information and justification as to why you need an advance payment, and then we can process that and move it to you. Like I said, there's an invoice process in which we will reimburse you about those expenses incurred. And then record retention, you need to maintain these records for your project. All right. This slide is a little bit tangential to the thing what we're talking about, which is we've just been talking about the direct to farmer grant program, which we've been running for a while. I want to highlight that we also have a block grant pilot program that's going on. This is where CDFA funded block grant programs, which consist of nonprofits and other entities to administer these type of grants. There's CDFA has selected perhaps a local entity. They're listed here. Let's just say Ventura RCD is one of them listed here to provide incentives in their districts. And they are going to be providing technical assistance to individuals that are interested in applying for that program. Now, I want to stress something. Please keep in mind that you shouldn't be applying for both the block grant pilot program and the direct to farmer program, the one we've been talking about all day, for the same APM, for the same project. It's okay to have two different projects in mind, but it causes downstream troubles for us. So keep in mind that the block grant block grant program still is available for interested parties, and you'll find on the SWEEP webpage a subpage that is for the block grant pilot program service area, when you can find that contact information for those folks. But that's not the same as the direct-to-farmer program, which we've been talking about. Okay.
Hey Scott, can I stop you really quick? Would you mind going back to the other slide?
Yeah.
We've had a couple questions on the block grant pilot program, and I just wanted to make a couple things pretty clear. So for one, we get a lot of questions about like what is the difference between the block grant pilot program? How can a grower discern whether or not they should apply to one or the other? Um, that's a hard question to answer. The block grant pilot program has given funding to the block grant recipients, and those folks are going to either be acting as a technical assistance provider or contracting with a technical assistance provider. Their solicitation windows and the way that they open their applications, whether it's a rolling basis or competitive, is really up to them. Scott mentioned that we have information on the block grant pilot program on our webpage. I would invite everyone to go to that block grant pilot page and look at the block grant recipients list, because it gives you a good idea of who has been funded, and you can see that on our map. And then you can go to their website and figure out when their solicitation windows are, what kind of application they're going to do, etc. If you are the kind of person that has like a relationship with, let's say, the California Land Stewardship Institute, it may behoove you to want to apply with them because you're familiar with those folks. Maybe you've worked with them in the past and you really trust them and you really like the work that they do. So that's pretty important. The other thing that I wanted to note is that we have their service areas listed on that list as well, and you can see it on the map. There is one block grant recipient that is providing assistance statewide, and that's Calusa Indian Community Council, and they are providing statewide assistance to tribal members statewide. So only to tribal members statewide. There is another question that I keep seeing over and over again, and that question is if an application is denied in our traditional sweep, the one that we're discussing today, can someone apply through the block grant pilot program? The answer is no. We don't want to see that. I think Scott just mentioned that. I'm sorry, Scott, I was reading the questions and answers in the FAQ. We don't want to see that someone is applying to both. We're hoping that growers are going to choose one or the other. The other thing is that the solicitation windows for the application cycles may be completely different, or they might be at exactly the same time because the block grant pilot program has already begun. So make sure that as a grower, you're looking at which one you want to apply for, and please don't apply to both. We're hoping that folks are going to put their best foot forward and make their best effort to apply to one or the other. Okay. Go ahead, Scott. Sorry about that.
No problem. And just to add just don't apply for both with the same APN. Yeah. Okay, a little bit of sweep accomplishments. This is just to pat ourselves on the back. We've had 12 different cycles of funding over the years, starting in 2014, and we've awarded over $126 million to the state that have gone to on-farm projects so far. This is excluding the block grant dollars that were awarded because those projects haven't been installed yet. We are looking at funding. We have historically funded over 11,000 projects. That's right, 1,100 projects throughout the state. And those projects can range wildly. So they can range from under an acre to over 1,000 acres. And then the total projects acreage that's been impacted by the program was 170,000 total impacted acres. The project water savings is roughly the same amount as filling 74,000 Olympic pools per year, just to give you some sort of scope about the projected water savings. And energy savings or the GHG savings is roughly the same as 20,000 cars per year. That's just some basic metrics about the program as a whole over the 12 funding cycles and the projected savings. So with that, I think we're going to open it up. Steph, if you would stop recording the meeting. Feel free to either ask questions into the chat in the Q&A session,